got the privilege of also traveling to Cuba in 2022 to learn about the impacts of the U.S. blockade. And a justification that I hear over and over again from political elites in the United States is that the blockade is imposed because Cuba isn't a democracy. They don't have democracy in Cuba. But when I was in Cuba, something interesting happened. I was sitting at dinner with my Cuban hosts when I found out that Roe versus Wade was being overturned in the United States. While I was in a country that not only gives people the right to an abortion, but a free abortion on demand whenever they need it. So in the US, a handful of people that I didn't elect, that were appointed by a president I did not have the right to vote for because of my age, threw out my right to an abortion because they could. Because our democracy doesn't require our consent to revoke our rights, and our political system doesn't ask what we want or consult us in our own futures. So our leaders they're not actually concerned about democracy here or in Cuba. The explicit intent of the blockade is to crush the Cuban economic and political systems. Leaked, official, U.S. documents have proved that to be true. There's no more denying the fact that after 60 years it hasn't worked. So the U.S. doubles down and places Cuba on the state sponsor of terrorism list, and the result is more human suffering. Cubans deserve the right to chart their own course, to build their own future, and to decide their own political and economic structures. And it has been disgusting to watch local, state, and national leaders roll their eyes at the migrant crisis in the city of Chicago when they haven't done a single thing to call out the sanctions that are causing so many people to leave Latin America in the first place. The United Nations votes overwhelmingly against the blockade of Cuba every single year. The world does not support economic warfare on the people of Cuba. While the blockade hasn't been successful in its explicit goals to overthrow the Cuban government, it makes life in Cuba very difficult. Any leader pretending to care about the Cuban people that also supports the economic policy that causes their suffering is lying to protect their own political ideology. The people of Cuba are the ones suffering under this blockade due to a lack of medicine, fuel, food, and more coming into the country, and it's mighty convenient for American politicians to implement a suffocating blockade that stops necessary goods from coming into the country and then blame that deficit of goods on socialism. The point of the blockade is cruelty, and any U.S. president has no right to talk about democracy or sovereignty or freedom or human rights as long as they support the blockade on Cuba. Code Pink calls for the immediate lifting of the blockade and a removal of Cuba from the state sponsor of terrorism list.